I'm Don Pfister, and I'm here in Gainesville, Florida, with Rosanne Healy. This is part of the Mycological Oral History program that Meredith established several years ago. It's the 12th of July, 2022. We're at the Hilton Hotel in Gainesville for the Mycological Society of America meeting. And I'm here with Rosanne Healy. And we're just going to talk, Rosanne, and have a general discussion. I think because we're doing mycological history, we're also finding out about people and their backgrounds and how they got into fungi. So kind of free form about you and your experience with mycology. So do you want to begin by, where you were born, what your family did to support you in your mycological studies, and how you got into fungi in the first place?
All right, sure. I was born on the East Coast. I was born in New York and raised in Pennsylvania and went to high school in New Jersey. Went to college in Minnesota, which was my version of going away from home, far away. And that is where I met my future husband, and who was also a biology major. I graduated in 1973, no, it's 1977, sorry. And didn't really know what I wanted to do with my degree because biology is pretty broad and I had not narrowed it down, although I always loved botany. Anyway, after we got married, we had 2 children, and I stayed home and raised them because he was a physician and in the Navy, and so it was a much better strategy for us to not have 2 people trying to work under those conditions. So I stayed home and raised my kids. Home being, by then, Iowa, then California, then Puerto Rico, until he got out and we moved back to Minnesota and then back to Iowa. So while we were in Puerto Rico, I really was fascinated by the trees there and the flowers, the plants, and how the trees could support 200 some epiphytes and just be home to so much life. And but there was no, at that time, which was 1980 to 84, there were few resources to go to look things up. We didn't have Google. We didn't, and the library on the base was pretty depauperate. So I determined that when we got back to the States, I would try to learn more about botany. So when we ended up in Iowa again, we were in Ames, which has Iowa State University, and I started taking botany classes. At the time it was still called botany, now it's called something else.
As is the case, yeah. Well, let me just ask you a little bit, because we're doing oral history too. Now, Ames has a strong, the university has a strong mycological history.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Right. It had, well, the person that I met there and started taking mycology classes from was Lois Tiffany, who was marvelous. She had been there when I met her in 1995. She had been there almost 50 years and was still teaching. And she was teaching a class in mycology that went all year, or both semesters, fall and spring. So I now realize what a luxury that was. I loved it at the time, but I didn't realize how rare that was to have all of that time for learning the different groups in depth. So, because she had 2 labs every week, and
I think that was probably a very traditional way to teach mycology. I know at Cornell, Dick Korff, who was the same generation as Tiffany. That he had a whole range of courses. You know, you'd take an introduction, then you could do ascomycetes and basidiomycetes and have
slime molds.
And
you
yeah,
can
and
look at some of the other things that were called
multiple
fungi.
years of in a curriculum with mycology. Yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up with a pretty firm basis, and I just loved her, and she was a great human being, and decided to start doing independent projects with her, including, well, let me back up a little bit. I lived on in a house that was surrounded by oak trees and hickory trees, and I loved to garden. And during the process of gardening, I was finding truffles. I brought one in to her, and she said, great. And I thought, oh, star. And a couple weeks later, she came back and she said, you know, I think you ought to present that at the next Iowa Academy of Science meeting. And I thought, what do I say? I mean, this is what I found. I guess I have to learn something about it. So I decided to just start looking for more. And I started with the county I was in, Story County, and came up with about 8 different species. And I thought, well, that was fun. Let's do the whole state. And so I asked for funding from the Iowa Academy of Science, and they gave me some funding to go look at 20 sites all over the state. And I developed a master's project around one of the most common species that I was finding. I should probably back up a little bit because that wasn't the first. There was a first project before I decided on Pachyplotes. I was going to do something similar to Kimbrough, where he had looked at the septopore ultrastructure and was able to tell what family a fungus, a Pizizomycete belonged to.
That's for the record. It's James Kimbrough, who was here at Gainesville for his career, and he was a student with Dick Korff at Cornell. Yes. But he took up TEM pretty early on.
Right. And at that time, we weren't using molecular methods, at least not at Iowa State. The botany department was. They were using it for plants, but in the mycology field, at least in Iowa, they were not yet doing that. So I was going the morphological route and learned TEM and SEM. And the first organism I wanted to focus on was an Elaphomyces. And I wrote down actually pretty elaborate notes on where this was so I could go back and recollect it to prepare it properly for looking at it with electron microscopy. And the next summer when I came back to look for it, I could not find it, and nothing looked right. And finally I realized they had repaired the waterway so that where it had been originally, where this organism had been originally, was now an island. So
one way to end a project.
Well,
or did you get to the island?
In tears. I were almost in tears. I went to the people who were at a concession stand and told them my plight, and they let me use a canoe. So I went out and I looked for it. I didn't find it, and I struggled against the current to come back after a couple of hours of fruitless search, and landed on the shore and thought, well, I may as well just do some more truffling. And that is when I found a truffle that I ended up naming for Tiffany. That's what ended up being called Temperantia, Tiffany. But I ended up having to do my work on Pachyplotes, which was one of the more common, even though it's really not that common. It was one of the more common ones in Iowa. And I it was a really fun study of spore wall development and septopore ultrastructure.
But then
Then I still didn't know what I wanted to do, and they weren't hiring people like me, you know, just doing general mycology. In fact, they still haven't really hired a replacement for Lois at Iowa State.
you finished, that was a master?
But that was my master's. I finished in 2002. And Jack Horner, who was my TEM, my electron microscopy instructor, hired me to work on tobacco and soybean ultrastructure of nectaries and multi, or whatever they called. Anyway, just working on the kinds of things that are good for agriculture. Mm-hmm. So at some point, pretty close to around when funding ran out, I realized if I wanted to do more work in depth on truffles, I would need to get a doctorate. But there was, Tiffany was no longer, she'd retired. I chased her into retirement. And so I looked north to Dave McLaughlin's lab because he was also an electron microscopist and had done amazing work on fungi, and talked to him about joining his lab as a PhD student, and he was kind enough to take me. But I ended up chasing him into retirement too. Anyway. That's that.
Yeah, you just
I've
chose
been
you
kind of
chose
hard on
everybody in the right way.
Hard on my advisors.
But it was kind of going home in a certain way, wasn't it, to
Yes,
go
it was,
to
yeah.
Minnesota? And Kevin, your husband, grew up in Minnesota, didn't he?
He grew up in Story County, Iowa, where
Okay.
that was why we ended up there.
School
in Minnesota. So
Minnesota.
that was where we met, was
Yeah.
in west central Minnesota,
Yeah.
at a couple of small colleges there,
St. John's.
St. John's and St. Ben's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know this because Kevin told me that he ran into a former student of
Yes.
ours, that mine,
He
Michael Hemaseth, who became president of the college.
And I kept forgetting to tell you that he said hello.
Well,
He says hello.
no, Kevin kind of caught me up on part of this, but Mike was one of our tutors in Kirkland House, and so we knew Mike really well. And I'd kind of followed him. I hadn't been in contact with him, but I'd followed him.
Yeah, well, he thought very highly of you and wanted to reach out, and I'm sorry for my poor memory. I always wanted to talk to you about other things. I didn't think of it.
Yeah, I know. So you worked on your PhD.
Well, during my work on my PhD, the first year, I knew about you, and that you were actually studying the group of fungi that like you were the world expert, really, no, on the group of fungi that I was interested in. But I'm a shy person, and I would not have wanted to talk to you about or presume to study with you, except that Matt Smith was there, and Matt Smith is very much more bold than I am, and told me that I really should study with you, and that I should apply for the Friends of the Farlow Fellowship, which I did, and I came out and met with you both, and we decided that I ought to pursue the spore mats that are produced on the forest floor, because there had been a paper put out that looked like it was connecting a spore mat with Pachyplodes, the organism the truffle that I was trying to work out phylogenetically. And so I took a leap of faith because I was imagining collecting lots of these spore mats and coming up with things that I had no understanding of. But it turned out that they were a lot of them were Pachyplodes,
Yeah.
but there were lots of other things as well. So it was a wild ride. It was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that was that. Well, it's ongoing.
It is ongoing because now we've been studying the sister group, Amylascus, which is only in the southern hemisphere, whereas Pachyplodes is only in the northern hemisphere, with a Fagaceae mostly, but some other tree species, genera as well. The sister group, at least in Patagonia, is only with the Nothofagaceae, the sister of the Fagaceae.
Yeah.
But also over in Australasia with some other trees as well, but that hasn't been as well worked out. There's been people like Eduardo Nora have looked at the tree roots of Nothofagaceae and found Amylascus on them. That needs to be done also in Australia.
And then you spent some time after the fellowship in Cambridge as well.
Well, that was when I begged Don to take me in.
Not exactly.
Which he did.
Well, and you then did the favor of taking over the mycology course.
Yes, that was.
And after a year of other fellowship, you.
Right. I put a grant proposal in to work at the Arnold Arboretum, looking at red oaks that were in the Arboretum, looking at the roots and comparing them, the ectomycorrhizal fungi on the roots in the Arboretum with ectomycorrhizal fungi on the roots of red oak in Harvard Forest. And indeed, we did see a difference. I have not yet published that. We did end up publishing on a truffle that we found.
Yeah, you had an undergraduate who.
Hannah Zurier, who worked with me, and she and I and Don were able to describe that truffle as tuber arnoldianum.
Because of where it came from.
Because of where it came from. Yeah. So that was really, that was quite interesting. And there's more data there that needs to be published at some point. But I also worked on Orbelia, which is one of Don's specialties, and looked at we were trying to answer the question of what are spore bodies, what are they doing, how do they develop? And so I used TEM to try to track that down. And
still work to do there.
Still work to do
we
there
thought
well.
We had a graduate student working on it, but that didn't work. But
yeah. So there's still lots of things to wrap up. But after working with Dawn and getting to teach, and Meredith let me have her notes as well as you for what you taught for fungal biology, and that helped a lot for being able to teach at the same time as continuing both of these projects that I was working on. And then one day when I was out in the Arnold Arboretum with Hannah, getting some more data for the project on the roots, Matt gave me a call and asked if I'd be interested in working in Gainesville, Florida, with on a job that was coming up. And I said, heck yeah. So I ended up in the same, Matt had taken over the job that James Kimbrough had left. And what's really funny to me is that I remember when I was in Lois Tiffany's lab and I was reading through James Kimbrough's papers, and I saw one where I think it might have been his MSA address, where there was a picture of him with a palm tree in the background and the sun beating down. And you have to understand that this is when I was in Iowa in the midst of winter. And I looked at that and I thought, you could be a mycologist in that kind of place?
And here you are.
And here I am.
Well, I think for having people look at this and reflect on it, yours is an interesting career, because of the way you came into it and your drive to do the PhD.
Yes.
I mean, what's your advice to young women? It's a different era, I know.
I guess one piece of advice is it's never too late. You can't, especially if you have collaborators who are willing to give you a leg up and help you out, and surround yourself with people like Dawn and Meredith and Matt.
And what about your husband, Kevin?
And my husband, Kevin, is a gem. He ended up retiring partway through grad school because my work with Dave McLaughlin, because it was a 3.5-hour drive between where he lived and where I lived, and in the midst of winter it was kind of difficult, and he was getting tired anyway of the call duty that he had as an anesthesiologist, and so he stopped working after my second year, and we moved in together again, and he's been a wonderful support system for me. I'm not going to tell you anything about that support because I want to keep it all a secret.
Well,
he's a gem. I don't want anyone to come in.
It's fine. Well, we all know that Kevin was very supportive.
He's really great. No, he takes over. So, well, it's kind of like a flip of life for us, because when I was raising the kids, he was the one making the money and supporting us financially. I was keeping the home fires burning, and now it's completely reversed. And he's the one who goes out and takes care of the grandchildren when our kids need help with that. And he makes me lunch, coffee in the morning, and dinners, and helps with all of the household. Really takes over all of the household chores and the finances. And I'm embarrassed to say I haven't gotten more done with all of the help that I've gotten.
Well, you've gotten quite a lot done. I'm always impressed with how many projects you have, and that you're
gotten a few things done, but lots to go. But yeah, so my advice is boy, if you're interested in the fungi, you're never going to get bored. You just
absolutely
just keep digging and going after the questions, and it's a never-ending source of fascination.